Hi everyone, I hope you're all having a great week. So, you're not seeing things wrong, you're not missing anything. The video is actually starting here. I had another clip where I showed you how I applied my first layer of paint. Unfortunately, that clip was very blurry. I initially thought maybe I should just include it so you could see what I was doing on the first layer, but it was so blurry that when I was watching it and reviewing it in order to edit my video, I started kind of feeling nauseated watching it. So I thought it would be better if I didn't put you through that as well. And so I decided to omit that first clip. So what I'm doing right now is basically working with the exact same colors that I applied at the very beginning of my painting process. And I'm gonna repeat my steps in some ways and show you what I did with the first layer, but I'm gonna be intensifying the colors in this case. It's frustrating when something like that happens, and we can choose to get mad at ourselves for making mistakes, or we can also choose to offer ourselves a little bit of grace when we do make mistakes, offer ourselves some compassion, and then move forward. And in this case, that's what I'm choosing to do. Sometimes I also like to remind myself that when things like that happen, maybe it was just meant to be that this is what you would see. After all, the colors I'm applying right now are the same colors that I applied when I first started my process, and so you're not going to miss a whole lot. Once I was done applying my first layer of color, I used some salt to create some of the textures that you see in the background, and then I let my paper dry naturally and moved on to this step that you're looking at right now. I have a palette of colors. It's called my Decadent Pies palette, and it's from a company called Watercolor Confections. And it's one of the very first watercolor palettes that I bought. And it's one of my favorites. I really love the colors, most of the colors in this palette. And in fact, I've had to buy replacement pans for this palette because I've used it so much that I've actually run out of the colors in it. So I hadn't worked with this palette in a while, and I wanted to bring out those colors that I love so much and play with them again. And this week's painting, I guess, even though I'm not 100% sure yet at this point exactly what it's going to be, is probably going to be an abstract of some sort. I may borrow some elements of neurographic art, and I will just paint intuitively as I usually do. Watercolor has the quality of being relatively transparent when you apply it in its diluted form. So if you're not applying a lot of pigment on your paper, the paint will be relatively transparent, and whatever is underneath the layer you're currently applying, or the layer I'm currently applying, will still be visible once I'm done applying it, unless I apply my paint with a lot of pigment. I love to work in layers. It's kind of how I love to build up my backgrounds and my paintings. And I love to play by intensifying my colors, but also I like to try to create a variety of textures as I go along creating these layers. And so that's what I'm doing right now. I'm applying some more color over the paint that was already there. You'll notice that here as I'm working, the paint is very, very diluted. So there's a little bit of pigment in the paint, but not so much that as I'm applying it, it's covering up the textures that are already on the bottom of my painting. I don't want to cover those textures up completely because I really love them and I want them to show through. Once I feel satisfied with the colors I've added in my background, I usually like to come in with my fountain pen to draw some shapes that will really bring some attention to some of the shapes that are created in my background. I find that some of the colors, as they were blending together, really created some interesting effects, and I like to draw attention to those effects by creating those shapes with my black pen. And it's interesting too, you'll probably notice this as well, as I'm adding the black on the paper, the colors do start to look like they're becoming even more vibrant. And that's because the black is so dark, it provides some contrast to these colors, and it really gives them a chance to shine. And this is where the part of my process that looks a little bit like neurographic art starts to show up, because I go in between my shapes, and anywhere I see lines forming what looks like a sharp corner, that's the best way I can describe it, I come in with my pen and I color in those areas. Let's move in a little bit closer so you can see exactly what it is I'm doing. As I'm working on the details of any artwork project, I like to switch up my tools. And this is because it will change the look of the marks. So in this case, I'm using an extra fine tip black pen, and that's in opposition to the medium tip fountain pen that I was using previously. So you'll notice that the marks are a lot more subtle than the marks that were left by my fountain pen, and so it creates more visual interest. It's good to change things up. If all the marks looked always the same, it wouldn't be quite as interesting. So by changing your tools, changing the ways you make your marks, changing the tools that you're using when you're making your marks, you will create something different that is more interesting. That plain and simple. I'm going to add a few splatters of paint using a color called Blackberry. It's one of my favorite ones in the palette. In fact, if you look at the palette itself, it has very little paint left in that pan, and that's because I've used it quite a bit. And I haven't used it yet in the painting, but I find that it does go really well with the colors that are currently in my background, so I don't mind adding a little bit of it. It'll also create a little bit more of a dark contrasting element, but just in a very subtle way. So I'm shifting things up a little bit because I want to show you a discovery I made. I've pulled out a few of the gold watercolor pans that I have in my possession. The two on the left are supposed to be the exact same color, a color called Pistachio Cream, which is in the Decadent Pies watercolor pan set that I've been working with for this video. The first one that I'm currently applying on the paper is the very first pan of Pistachio Cream that I got with my first set of Decadent Pies watercolor pans, and it's my favorite. I really love that color, and before I even discovered Star Gold, it was my go-to gold. Now, the interesting thing is that, of course, I used up this color quite a bit because I loved it a lot, and as you can see, the pan on the left is near empty, and so I ordered a new set of watercolor Decadent Pies, and I was a bit disappointed to see that the Pistachio Cream in my second set was different than the first pan I had initially ordered. So I don't know if this was a packaging or a packaging error where I was sent the wrong color, because I also own another set of watercolors by Prima, Watercolor Confections, called Shimmering Lights, and the gold in that palette looks a lot like the new Pistachio Cream that I got. And so I wanted to put all of these colors down on paper so that I could show you what they look like and ask you what you think, because at first I thought, is it just me? Am I just imagining things? My Pistachio Cream looks so much different than it used to look, and it's not nearly as shimmery. It's a lot more yellow, and I do think it looks a lot like that color I just applied called Gold in the Shimmering Light set. Now, you all know I really love Star Gold, so I thought I'd also apply some Star Gold on the paper just to show you the difference between these colors and the Star Gold, because it is, pretty impressive how different it is. The Star Gold is a lot more shimmery than any of the colors I've applied on the left, but it is more expensive, and so I have been using the Pistachio Cream kind of as a less expensive version of gold, and I really love the original version of the Pistachio Cream, but you'll see that the second version doesn't seem to be nearly as shimmery, and it's a lot more yellow. I think I actually like the gold from the Shimmering Lights palette more than the new Pistachio Cream. So I've contacted the manufacturers to see if this might have been an error that was made in packaging, and if it was, if there's any way I can get another pan of that Pistachio Cream, because I really do love it, and it is neat that it comes as a part of the Decadent Pies watercolor pan set. Initially, I thought I would work only with the colors from my Decadent Pies watercolor set. But when I made the discovery of my new pistachio cream being so yellow, I really didn't want that in my painting. It felt too yellow for the colors that were in the painting, so I decided that I was going to use my Star Gold instead. I guess, surprise, surprise, or not surprise, surprise. It's sort of been my go-to. I love this Star Gold. You all know it. If you've been watching my videos for any length of time, you've heard me talk about this color a lot. But it is a little bit more expensive than other watercolors that you can find in the market, on the market. So I really wanted to be able to offer you a second option. And I do think that the original pistachio cream in the Decadent Pie set is also really nice. I've used it in a number of my paintings and I really love it. But I'm not so much of a fan of the second formulation. So I don't know if it's a recipe change or what's going on. I will let you know when I get an answer from the company to see what it is they're gonna say. And with any luck, I'll get a new pan of that pistachio cream. The original pistachio cream anyway. I don't know. Is it just me? Please let me know if you see a difference. I feel like there's a big difference, but maybe it's just me. Maybe it's just my eyes. Maybe maybe I am not seeing it the same way you are. So I'd love to know what you think and if you're seeing a difference and if you could see yourself using any of these golds. They're all nice colors, but I do think that when I'm applying an iridescent paint, especially gold, I am looking for it to be shimmery, and that original pistachio cream was definitely more shimmery than the second version of it that I received. And of course, you can't beat Star Gold when it comes to shimmery paints, but again, it is a little bit more expensive, so it's nice to be able to use other less expensive paints, especially when we're painting and or beginning to paint and we're trying to learn how to use our paints. It's hard to invest in expensive products when we're not 100% sure this is something we're going to see ourselves doing in the long term. Now, I see myself doing this in the long term. I've already been doing this most of my life. So for me, it doesn't feel as big of a risk, I guess, to invest in paints by Kremer because I do use them a lot. I just want to be able to offer you different options. So what exactly do I mean by more expensive when I talk about Kremer's Star Gold being more expensive than the pistachio cream, for instance? I can't give you an exact amount because I've only been able to buy pistachio cream in the Decadent Pie set. I can tell you that the Decadent Pie set on Amazon runs at about $22, and a pan of Star Gold, only the Star Gold, runs for about $9. So that's a half pan. If you were to buy a full pan like the one I'm using right now, it's about $10. So you're almost better off buying the full pan than you are buying the half pan, especially if you love the color and you know you're going to use it a lot. So it's more expensive from the perspective that you're just getting that one half pan or full pan for about half the price of a full set of Decadent Pies watercolors. So if you were just starting out and you would like to have a chance to experiment with more colors and buy bigger sets of colors at a time, definitely the Decadent Pie set is a really good buy because it offers you a lot for your money. There are a lot of different colors in the set, and like I said, I really love most of the colors in that set. And honestly, I really love the pistachio cream, especially the original version of it. The second version of it is nice. It's just more yellow than I prefer it to be for a gold, and it doesn't seem to shimmer quite as much. But I really, really love the other colors in that set. Like I said, I created most of the paint, most of what's in my background for this painting using the colors from that set, and it's one of my favorite sets. I've used it a lot in the past and I plan on continuing to use it, which is why I keep buying more of that paint. So I'm not, trying to sell you on anything. I'm just trying to give you the information that may help you make some decisions when it comes to purchasing your paints. I know a lot of you are beginner level artists, and it can be expensive when you're first starting to develop some skills or create a hobby for yourself. So I want you to have options that you can work with. The Star Gold is definitely a color that's a little bit more yellow in its intonations, I guess, than the Pistachio Cream, which was a little bit more of a muted gold, but also a very pretty gold. I do, however, find that it's not nearly as much of a bright yellow, kind of like the new Pistachio Cream. Reminds me a little bit of Nickel Azo Yellow, a color that I really, really love, by the way. And so if I wanted to use that gold, maybe not as a substitute, but a close second to Nickel Azo Yellow, maybe I could use it in instances where I feel Nickel Azo Yellow would be great and I also want to add a little bit of shimmer. I think that would be a really great option. But I love this Star Gold in particular, not just because of the color of it, but mostly because of how much it shimmers. I'm telling you, there's really, not yet anyway, I haven't found a close, I haven't found anything that really rivals this gold in watercolors yet, that rivals it completely, because it's so shimmery. I mean, when it catches the light, there really is nothing like it. So it's one of my favorites. I use it a lot, and what can I say? I really love it. But I believe in recommending products that I actually love to use, and it would be really hard for me to talk about a product or promote a product, if you will, that I actually don't really like. So that's me. That doesn't mean you feel the same way about these colors, and remember that that's okay too. We all have our preferences, and it's important that we honor those preferences and honor the ways that we love to create and the things that actually ignite or bring a spark to our creative inspiration. And for me, the Star Gold definitely does that. At this point, I'm really feeling called to bring in a little bit of white into my painting. There are a lot of medium values and dark values in my painting so far. That Star Gold does add an element of lighter value, but it's not quite as light as white. And so I like to have a lot of contrast in my paintings. I find that that makes the painting look very interesting. And so I want to add some white to bring in that light value contrast. There's a number of ways or different ways that white can be added to a painting like this. I often will work with my Pentel Signa white pens. They work quite well, especially when they're new. I do find that they work quite well over watercolors. But if I apply my many layers of paint and my paper becomes very saturated with color pigment, sometimes it's harder for me to work with my Signa pens. So when this happens, I typically turn to gesso. And the reason I like to work with white gesso is because it's relatively inexpensive for the quantity of it you can buy. And it does a really good job of applying nice opaque color, white color, to my painting. So that's my preference. I also have worked with gouache, white gouache. It is a little bit more expensive, so I tend to not use it when I know I'm going to be applying a lot of it. It's just a preference. I think, we're all different, but the nice thing about gouache or gesso is that they are typically applied opaque over watercolors, and so either one of them is a pretty good choice. But like I said, gesso's a little bit less expensive, and for me it's easy to work with it over watercolors. I have actually worked using it to sometimes make changes in my painting. If there are areas in the painting that I wasn't as crazy about, then I'll come in with some gesso to try and cover up what's there. It won't, if I dilute it, it won't completely cover up the watercolor. It'll sort of blend with the watercolor, and it can still, especially if I dilute it and don't apply it too thickly, I can still apply watercolor over it. So I do tend to work with gesso quite a bit in my paintings. It's an art supply that I have a lot of because I use a lot of it, because I'm not just a mixed media artist who works with watercolors, but I work also with acrylic paints, and I work with a lot of different mediums in my studio. So I have a lot of it on hand and I love to use it. It's time to take off the tape and move in for a closer look. The colors in this painting really make me happy, and I love how they all pull together to create some interesting marks, interesting textures, and an overall interesting piece of artwork. As I was working, I'm sure you noticed that nothing I did to create this little painting was all that complicated. I actually used some very simple marks in a repetitive way using different colors, different tools, and different applications. And that's all it was. With this, I hope you're also feeling inspired to create some artwork of your own. Thank you again for making the time to join me on this creative journey. I hope you have a wonderful week and happy creating!